he has shared his slides.
Raring to go.
No, just being careful because of this Zoom meeting. Sometimes we end up slides not sharing at all. So our everyday problems. Every day we have our afternoon sessions are on Zoom, sir. Iyengar sir, yeah, every day we have from 2 to 4, 2:15 to 4 o'clock classes, and they're all on Zoom. It's been they're going on for past almost one and a half year now. So we know we foresee some problems always. So we try and keep things steady.
Yes, technology sometimes can let you down. You can't do anything about it.
We can't do anything, yeah. Then especially the connections. I hope the connection remains stable. Sometimes the Wi-Fi goes off. Sometimes so that's why I just thought I'll log in early and then.
Ravi is telling Wi-Fi is as unpredictable as wife.
Dangerous statement. Good. It's okay for your age, sir. So I can't make the statement yet.
Then you won't agree.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir.
As useful as wives.
Yeah.
Good evening, Ravi Mutt.
Good evening, Patil sir. Good evening. Hello, sir. Nice to see you after a long time.
Namaskara, Patil sahib. Bala jana aito.
I joined, I think.
Dr. Patil. Dr. C.B. Patil.
Patil sir, Ravinath sir is calling you.
Yes, muted or I don't know.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our MAC Monday Musings. And we are fortunate that we have with us today Dr. Ravindranath.
Recording in progress.
Who is professor at Jayadeva Institute of Cardiology, great international cardiologist, great teacher, and a great human being. And he was our Vice Chancellor of Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences for some time, and was kind enough to agree to chair this session for this talk by Dr. Ravi Mutt. Professor Ravindranath, the mic is yours.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for this opportunity. So today, Dr. Ravi Mutt is going to give a talk on evidence-based therapy of chronic coronary artery disease. Still a lot of things. The coronary artery disease treatment is evolving. In the sense, more and more data, more and more evidence is emerging. Since coronary artery atherosclerosis in general is a progressive disease. We have epicardial coronary artery atherosclerosis. Sometimes it could be just a plaque, non-obstructive or obstructive plaque, can progress. It is an evolving dynamic process. It is a progressive disease. So patients can develop sudden occlusion of coronary artery due to plaque rupture or plaque erosion, resulting in ACS, or remain stable for a long time, resulting in chronic stable coronary disease. That's why European Society, actually nomenclature has been changed to chronic coronary syndromes, because it may not be a stable disease. That's why it's only chronic coronary artery disease or chronic coronary artery syndrome. This plaque can change anytime based on the various risk factors and other probably lifestyle. The plaque can change. To understand this chronic coronary syndrome or coronary artery disease, what is the evidence we have? We know the standard lifestyle, pharmacological therapy, and the revascularization. We have a lot of data with respect to pharmacological therapy versus revascularization. Among revascularization, PCI versus CABG. I think let us listen to Dr. Ravi Mutt and we'll have discussion. And at the end, I welcome Dr. Ravi Mutt to give his talk on evidence-based therapy for coronary artery disease. Dr. Ravi Mutt, can go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Good evening to all. Good evening, respected teachers, esteemed chairperson, my colleagues. My slides are visible, sir, and am I clearly audible?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. And my talk is on evidence-based therapy of chronic CAD. I've kept the term CAD because it's still the standard terminology that's going around. CCS is the latest term that the ESC has advised, but still it's not come into vogue. Now, treatment of chronic coronary artery disease, the objectives are: one, elevate symptoms. The second is to improve your prognosis, which includes improvement in death, MI, and heart failure. The treatment begins always with patient education. This is an integral part of CAD management. You have to discuss all the therapeutic options with the patient, whether it's revascularization, whether it's OMT. Stress upon risk factor reduction, stress upon the importance of medical therapy as well as compliance to medical therapy. Give appropriate advice regarding his physical activity, and also educate him or her regarding how to recognize that symptoms are worsening and that he needs now to go to the hospital for therapy for his worsening symptoms. So the treatment of chronic CAD involves two aspects. One is optimal medical therapy. The second is revascularization. Now, these two modalities should be viewed as complementary rather than as competing or alternative therapies, because each one tends to amplify the effects of the other. And whenever you're treating chronic CAD, it is very important to concentrate on the hard endpoints, namely death, MI, or stroke, rather than looking at the soft endpoints, which no doubt are important for the patient per se. But when you assess the effects of a therapy, they should be looking at the hard endpoints. Soft endpoints include relief of angina as well as repeat revascularization. So coming now to optimal medical therapy. Now, this is a terminology that's very often used, but unfortunately it has not been very well or very concretely defined. And one very well accepted definition is evidence-based comprehensive lifestyle pharmacological interventions to achieve certain specific risk factor goals. It includes lifestyle modification, risk factor modifications, as well as pharmacotherapy. Now, the next two slides are probably the most important part of my talk, so they are a little crowded, but please bear with me and go through that. Lifestyle modification. The first one is complete cessation of all forms of tobacco, both active forms as well as passive forms. Tobacco cessation reduces mortality by as much as 50% in the first year itself. Overall, there's a 36% risk reduction in mortality. And this benefit is as good as any other secondary pharmacological therapy, such as aspirin. The second aspect is to promote a healthy diet. The healthy diet involves promotion of diets that are rich in vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. Avoidance of fatty foods. I won't go into the details of this part because India, being a multicultural and multilingual society, has various diets, and each region can promote its own healthy diet. The third aspect is physical activity. Physical activity has also been referred to as a polypill because it can improve a whole lot of factors such as blood pressure, lipids, glucose, in addition to reducing CV mortality. Each patient should be advised to perform at least 30 to 60 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic exercises for at least 5 days a week. Moderate intensity is the simplest way to tell them is to go for brisk walking. They don't need to go to a gym. They just need to go and walk daily at a brisk pace. They can also be advised to go in for resistance training for 2 days a week, but this is optional. This is not mandatory, but performing a moderate intensity aerobic exercise is extremely important. Fourth is alcohol. The earlier recommendation was moderation of alcohol, that is 1 drink per day for a female and up to 2 drinks for males. But the latest evidence suggests that the level to which the risk is minimized happens at 0 alcohol intake. This is the latest study from Lancet. We can discuss this later on, but yeah, this is the latest evidence. And of course, we need to concentrate on stress, depression, air pollution, influenza vaccination, and importantly now is COVID vaccination. The next part of OMT is risk factor reduction. This involves 4 things. First is weight reduction, especially in obese and overweight people. They need to reduce their weight and as well as maintain their weight. This also reduces cardiac and all-cause mortality, again has a good effect on your blood pressure, sugars, and lipids. For Indians, the recommendation is to target a BMI of 23 or less with a waist circumference of 90 centimeters in males and 80 centimeters in females. For diabetes, a a conservative target of HbA1c of less than 7% is recommended. We don't want a strict control of HbA1c in diabetics. It is recommended now that those drugs that have been shown to have a cardiovascular benefit, especially the SGLT2 inhibitors and the glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonists, are to be used for patients with established CAD. These agents tend to have a benefit which is not dependent on their HbA1c lowering. They have their own independent benefits. Third is hypertension. Here, the blood pressure target should be 130/80 because the SPRINT trial showed that there's an all-cause mortality reduction by 27%. But at the same time, there's a J curve, and the ESC guidelines recommend that you should not go below 120/70 millimeter of mercury. The preferred antihypertensives are ACE inhibitors and ARBs, ACE inhibitors or ARBs and beta blockers. We can advise add other antihypertensives as well if you want to reach the goal. And finally, lipids, LDL. It's recommended that we have an LDL reduction of at least 50% from the baseline with an LDL target of anywhere between 55 to 70. 55 is what the ESC recommends and 70 is what the ACC recommends. And there's a much more stringent target if you have a event within the last 2 years despite maximal therapy. That is, if you have one more event despite being at this target range, then your target can go down to 40. The preferred agents are high-dose statins. We'll come to this later on. You may add ezetimibe or PCSK9 inhibitors if you cannot reach the target goal. Now, moving on to pharmacological therapy. This has two parts. One are the drugs that have been known to reduce MI and death, and the second are the anti-ischemic drugs. Starting first with the drugs that reduce MI and death. Here we have four groups of drugs: antiplatelets, statin, ACE inhibitors, and if you are intolerant to ACE inhibitor, ARBs, and lastly beta blockers. So we begin with antiplatelets. In stable coronary artery disease, it is recommended a single antiplatelet agent is recommended. The aspirin is the traditional drug of choice. The duration of therapy is indefinite. Aspirin has been shown to reduce mortality, death, and MI by around 33%. This was done in a very old trial called the SAPART trial done in Sweden, where they randomized, patients with CAD to aspirin versus placebo. They didn't have any antiplatelets in the placebo arm. Now, what is the optimum dose of aspirin? The dose of aspirin that is now recommended is 75 to 100 milligrams per day, because the latest adaptable trial that was published in NEJM just last month, I believe, or 2 months back, showed that a dose of 81 and 325, the primary endpoints are similar, but the GI tolerance is much better for the 81 drugs. The caveat in this trial was that 41% in the 325 arm switched over to 81 mg arm. So that created some imbalance, but the recommendation now is for 81 mg of aspirin as the standard dose. If you're intolerant to aspirin, you may use clopidogrel. This was seen in the CAPRI trial that showed a small but statistically significant risk reduction in the cardiovascular events of 8%. This was a very old trial, and with the advantage of less GI bleeding in the clopidogrel arm. The dose of clopidogrel that's recommended for stable CAD is 75 milligrams per day. Now, what about dual antiplatelet therapy? DAPT, as you know, leads to more potent inhibition. Currently, the DAPT recommendation in stable CAD is only after a coronary stent implantation, or you may sometimes use it after a CABG, but the recommendation is not very, very strong there. The drugs that are recommended for stable CAD after stent implantation are aspirin and clopidogrel. This is a recommendation for stent implantation. Ticagrelor and prasugrel could be considered if you have high risk situations during stenting, for example, stenting of left main, or you have a complex bifurcation, or you have had a stent result that's not very optimum. The duration of treatment is for 6 months. Now, what happens if you prolong the duration beyond 6 months? Do you have an improvement in the outcomes? We have had 3 studies in this respect for stable CAD. One is the DAPT study for DS, the Pegasus TIMI54 post-MI 1 to 3 years after an MI, and the Themis study in diabetics above 50 years of age with stable CAD. Now, all of these had a uniform finding. First, they all improved ischemic events in the form of death, MI, and stroke, all of them. But each one of them showed an increase in major bleeds. In fact, that the magnitude of improvement of ischemic events was counterbalanced exactly by the magnitude of increased bleedings. In fact, this to some extent led to an increase in all-cause mortality in the DAPT arm. This was partly due to increased bleeding, but mostly due to cancers and infections. But this risk was seen. So currently, prolonged DAPT is reserved for only those group of patients who have a high ischemic risk and low bleeding risk. These could be, patients could be stratified using the DAPT score of more than 2, or if they have multivessel disease with, say, diabetes, recurrent MI, PAD, or a CKD. You could use any of these 4 agents. I'll come to rivaroxaban in the next slide. But please remember that this is still a class 2B recommendation. It's not a class 2A recommendation, because bleeding is definitely increased by any addition of any antiplatelets along with aspirin. Now, what about addition of anticoagulation to a low-dose anticoagulation to antiplatelets? This was studied in the CAMPAS trial using rivaroxaban 2.5 mg PD. This was a very large trial of 27,000 patients, which had 3 arms: rivaroxaban 2.5 with aspirin, rivaroxaban 5 mg alone, and aspirin alone. And this study did show that rivaroxaban with aspirin reduced the primary endpoint of death, MI, and stroke. But as I mentioned, this was at the expense of major bleeding. Surprisingly, in this trial, there was no difference of any MI. There was a fantastic improvement in stroke of almost 42%, and there was some reduction in CV death and all-cause death, but this was not statistically significant using the p-value of 0.025. The trial was terminated prematurely because the DSSP said that there's already a good benefit. But please remember that whenever a trial is terminated prematurely, the observed effects tends to get exaggerated. The net ischemic benefit, as I mentioned, 1.3%, was exactly counterbalanced by an increase in bleeding. So currently, anticoagulation, if at all to be used in the form of rivaroxaban 2.5, is recommended for this group of patients. First, patients who have atherosclerosis in at least 2 vascular territories, say a coronary with a peripheral or a coronary with a cerebrovascular disease. Second, patients with CAD with 2 or more risk factors, which include CKD, DM, hypertension, heart failure, or smoking. It's only in this group that currently we have some recommendations. This is not in the guideline, but this is what I could gather by going through various articles. Moving now to lipid-lowering agents, starting with statins. Statins are that group of medications that have the greatest evidence or the most robust evidence. The benefit is graded, and it depends on the level of LDL reduction with no lower baseline limit. That is, even if you're starting LDL is say 100 or 70, you can still go down further and still achieve a benefit. For each 38 milligram per deciliter lowering of LDL, you have a reduction in all-cause mortality by 10%, cardiac mortality, non-fatal MI, everything is reduced. Further, if you use a more intensive statin therapy, you have a greater reduction when compared to a moderate intensity therapy. And lastly, the risk is reduced further for every year of statin that you continue, and the benefits tend to be greater over prolonged therapy. High intensity statin is defined as that dose that reduces your LDL by at least 50%, whereas moderate intensity is that reduces by 30 to 50%. So high intensity therapy is for atorvastatin is 40 to 80 milligrams, for rosuvastatin is 20 to 40 milligrams. You can choose a moderate intensity statin, especially if you're above the age of 75. But even here, if the patient can't tolerate, try and go for the high intensity therapy. But if he is frail, if he is having dementia, if there are other multiple comorbidities, you may go for a moderate intensity therapy. As I mentioned, the target is to reduce the LDL by at least 50%, and the target is 55 to 70 milligrams per deciliter. And if the patient has another vascular event within last 2 years of maximum statin therapy, you may go for a target of 40 milligrams per deciliter. So if your LDL levels are not achieved with the maximally tolerated statin, you can add ezetimibe. This is based on the results of the IMPROVE-IT trial, which added for ezetimibe to 40 milligrams of simvastatin. LDL levels were reduced to 53 milligrams in this arm, and this trial was a very long trial, over 6 years. The benefits tended to occur only after the first year. There was no improvement in mortality, but MI and stroke reduced. So you may add ezetimibe if you don't reach your target levels. Now, coming to PCSK9 inhibitors, these are extremely potent LDL lowering agents, which can, or on an average, they tend to lower the LDL by at least 60 to 70%. They were studied in the Fourier trial, which was again a mega trial of 27,000 patients of stable CAD or stable atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. LDL levels came down to 30 milligrams at 48 weeks. The primary endpoint was reduced by 15%, not a great reduction, but still statistically significant because you had a combined endpoint of almost 5 endpoints here. MI and strokes were reduced, but there was no mortality benefit, unfortunately. So currently, PCSK9 inhibitors are mainly reserved for those patients who are at extremely high risk, who do not reach their goals of LDL levels, despite a combination of despite a combination of statin and ezetimibe. But please remember, even the USA guidelines says that they will be cost effective only if your cost of these PCSK9 is reduced by at least 70 to 85% from the current levels. This is what USA says. Indians, I'm sure you will have to look at your own cost benefit ratio. So please discuss your cost benefit ratios. Remember that they need to be given at least twice a month or sometimes once a month. And the net benefit also needs to be discussed because as of now, mortality benefit has not been demonstrated. You can reduce your LDL levels by almost 85% when you combine a PCSK9 with a statin with an ezetimibe. A word about hypertriglyceridemia. Until now, there was no trial that demonstrated that reduction of triglyceride levels, either using a fibrate or a niacin, led to an improvement in outcomes. But we now have a trial in the form of REDUCE-IT that randomized icosapent ethyl, which is a purified EPA ethyl ester of 2 grams per day, twice a day, with patients had a TG level of 150 to 500, and all of them were on a statin. This actually showed a very fantastic result. Almost 25% reduction in the primary endpoint, 26% reduction in death, MI, stroke, 31% reduction in MIs. And interestingly, benefits were seen irrespective of the levels of triglycerides that were achieved. So the authors feel that apart from triglyceride lowering, there could be some other additional properties. Maybe an anti-inflammatory property, maybe a membrane stabilizing effect, or some sort of an anticoagulant effect that could have led to this fantastic results. We need to see that this gets reproduced in other trials, but this is the first time that a trial has shown that reducing triglyceride levels leads to improved outcomes. Coming on to ACE inhibitors. ACE inhibitors have already, I won't go too much into details because this is a well-established field. ACE inhibitors have a class 1 recommendation for all CAD patients if they have accompanying hypertension, diabetes, heart failure, and LVEF of less than 40% or CKD. They can be used, or it's reasonable to use an ACE inhibitor if they do not have any of these above criteria based on the HOPE and the Europa trials. Europa trial, as you're aware, enrolled patients who were low risk CAD, but we did not have heart failure or hypertension. My personal opinion is that irrespective of what they may have, all CAD patients should receive an ACE, or if they're intolerant, they may receive an ARB. If you want to add some agent to an ACE inhibitor to improve their hypertension, CCBs could be one option because they tend to sort of amplify the results based on the ASCOT and the accomplished trials. Coming to beta blockers are recommended for all patients with a prior MI, where they have been shown to reduce mortality by 23%, or if they have LV dysfunction, because in these two subgroups, they have been shown to reduce MI and death. Following an MI, it is recommended to continue beta blockers for at least 3 years. Beyond 3 years, you may continue it, but it's a class 2A recommendation. Please do remember that beta blockers do not have a survival benefit in patients with CAD without any prior history of MI or LV dysfunction. In this group of patients, beta blockers are mainly indicated only if they want for angina reliefs. So if your patient does not have angina, does not have prior MI, does not have LV dysfunction, you don't need to give a beta blockers. Cardioselective beta blockers are preferred here in the form of metoprolol, bisoprolol, carvedilol, and you titrate them to a resting heart rate of 55 to 60 beats per minute. Now coming on to anti-ischemic therapy. Anti-ischemic therapy include that group of agents which reduce your anginal symptoms and improve exercise capacity. But please remember, they do not reduce MI, death, or do not prevent disease progression. Traditionally, they have been divided into first line and second line, but this is mainly because the first line agents came much more earlier in the past. That is because of chronological order. So beta blockers tend to be the preferred agents for CAD unless you have a contraindication, but choice has to be individualized. It could be any of these 7 agents, ranolazine, nivabradine, depending, but please do see to it that whenever you use these drugs, they should be used in the maximal tolerated doses before you say that they are failed. Traditionally, we say that at least 2 anti-anginal drugs should be used in a patient using maximally tolerated doses before we say that they have treatment failure or they are not responsive to OMT. So to summarize, OMT involves lifestyle modifications. These are the 4 parts: abstinence of alcohol, abstinence of tobacco, a healthy diet, promotion of physical activity, and moderation of alcohol. Risk factor modification, attaining an optimal weight, controlling blood pressure, lipids, and diabetes, and pharmacotherapy, which includes this 4 group of agents, which you need to see that they're always there: antiplatelet, statin, ACE inhibitors, and beta blockers if they have a past history of MI or LV dysfunction. So if you look at data, you may say that what is the data for all this? Why do we need to combine so many, do all this? Why do we need to combine all these agents? If you look at the BARI 2D trial or the COURAGE trial, both these trials came to a uniform outcome, that as the number of risk factors that are controlled increases, your outcomes improve. So here, if you can see on a left-hand screen, patients who had only 2 risk factors that were controlled had a 2 times increased mortality versus those who had all 6 controlled. Similarly, in the COURAGE trial, if you had all 6 factors, all 6 risk factors controlled, you had a 73% reduction in mortality. Now, not only does it improve the outcomes in patients who are on medical therapy, but even in patients who have undergone revascularization, optimal pharmacotherapy, defined as a combination of a statin, an antiplatelet, a beta blocker, and an ACE inhibitor, has been shown to improve outcomes. In the SYNTAX trial, use of OMT reduced mortality by 36%. And the treatment with OMT actually had a greater effect on mortality than either CABG or PCI. OMT improved outcomes irrespective of whether patient underwent a CABG or a PCI. That means whether you undergo CABG or a PCI, please see to it that your patients receive optimal medical therapy in the form of a high-dose statin, and at least 1 antiplatelets, ACE inhibitor, and if required, a beta blocker. So we now move on to revascularization. Revascularization, excuse me, let me just take a sip of water. Thank you. So revascularization has 2 objectives. One is to improve your quality of life, either by reducing your angina or improving exercise capacity. As I had mentioned, you have to use at least 2 or more anti-anginal agents in adequate or maximally tolerated doses for at least 2 weeks before you say that the patient is resistant to OMT. Of course, he should not be in a stage of unstable angina, or he should not be in a stage of reaching an ACS. That is an entirely different group of people. But often when we take our patients to cath lab saying that they are now having severe angina, we need to see that they're at least on 2 agents. And the second objective is to improve long-term outcomes in the form of death or MI. So we'll go through these 3 headings: bypass versus medical therapy, bypass versus PCI, and lastly, it's not a correct way of putting it, but I've kept it here because for the sake of simplicity, PCI versus medical therapy. I'll come to this thing later on.
Sir, Dr. Iyengar.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Iyengar is there. So shall we now have a discussion on medical management, because we'll give little pause to Ravi.
Thank you.
So we'll medical management, then we'll discuss the next part.
Okay, we'll restrict to 5 minutes so that.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something. Yeah.
So I have just a clarification. I have not touched upon anti-inflammatory therapies here because they've still not reached the guidelines. Colchicine and CANTOS trial, 2 trials that I have not covered here. So apologies for that.
So, yeah. Dr. Vinath, comments?
Yeah, sir. Yeah, they touched upon important this lifestyle, especially a suggestion of smoking he touched upon, which is more essential than using our ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, or statins, because all the platelet risk reduction is under 40%. Yeah, smoking suggestion is reduce 40% is a good thing. Another important thing he touched upon is especially newer thing I am going to discuss, mainly this diabetes management.
Sorry, just a minute. Ms. Mallikarjun,
Some background noise.
Yeah.
Can we mute?
please mute others, please. Sorry, yeah, Dr. Ravindra, sorry for that.
One is that smoking cessation is important. So it's upon this level of alcohol. There is still probably with respect to atrial fibrillation, there is nothing like low dose. There is nothing like even threshold is actually it should be very high, because even small quantity of alcohol can cause atrial fibrillation. With respect to coronary artery disease, I think we will discuss at the end. But regarding diabetes, important drugs, SGLT2 and GLP analogs have significantly reduced the major cardiovascular events, so cardiorenal benefits. So another thing, what is the new thing which he has discussed about COMPASS? Usually it should be given for polyvascular disease, those who have coronary artery disease and the peripheral arterial disease, or with a very high risk, multiple risk factors, probably adding rivaroxaban 2.5 milligram BID, with a caveat that they have a very low bleeding risk, preferably young patients with a low bleeding risk. I think adding rivaroxaban has shown some benefit, mainly reduction in the stroke stress. Regarding statins, I think the LDL level is more important than the doses in chronic coronary artery disease. So it touched upon should be at least if they have already an event and diabetes, 55, or if they have reinfarction, probably you can go as low as 40 milligram of LDL. And also it touched upon icosapentaylate in reduce it. Only thing that it reduces the cardiovascular events, but there is a slight increase in the atrial fibrillation, those who have received, and also some bleeding were seen. And other, of course, colchicine is another thing which is coming up. It's not in the guidelines, it did not touch upon. Not only post-MI, even chronic stable angina, Lodoco to trial has shown, yeah, some anti-inflammatory. You mentioned, anyway, it is not in the guidelines. So that is probably coming up. And ACE and ARBs, especially those who have definitely in chronic stable angina, if there is a hypertension with and diabetes mellitus, probably one and with CKD plus LV dysfunction. These are the things which you have to be used in ACE inhibitors, ARBs. Any other things, sir, you would like to?
There's one question from the chat box. But Priyanka Singh, sir, when to start rivaroxaban in stable coronary artery disease?
As I mentioned, for me, it's a little low on the on my agenda as of now. I would have been very happy if COMPASS had a DAPT arm. Unfortunately, there was no DAPT arm in the COMPASS trial. There was the rivaroxaban arm, 5 mg BD. I don't know. My personal opinion was that could have been kept as a DAPT arm, because our traditional practice is that if you think a patient is at high risk, we add another antiplatelet in the form of clopidogrel. So as Ravinath sir just now mentioned, you mainly would want to use them when you have polyvascular disease, that is, say, CAD with peripheral artery disease, CAD with a cerebrovascular disease. That's the only group of patients where currently there is a wide consensus that it may be used. The primary problem is that neither COMPASS nor Voyager showed any benefit in terms of MI. I went through both these papers. There was no improvement in MI. The entire benefit looks to be through stroke. So that's my opinion. I understand there's a small benefit in terms of mortality, but if you look at the article, if you read the article in detail, the authors themselves claim that this is not statistically significant. The p-value should have been 0.025, but it's 0.01. So because of multiple calculations, this p-value is not significant. So for me, polyvascular disease could be one option. Yeah. Ravinath sir, or?
Can rivaroxaban be started in acute coronary syndrome patients?
Yes, that there is data from the ATLAS, I think TIMI 51 trial. That data is there, but again, there too there was an increase in bleeding. So you need to balance the two.
Yeah,
So
with very strong antifibrotics now we have ticagrelor and
right, sir.
we very
So
rarely require this unless
we may not
that's
require
defibrillation rather than patients. How long should we wait for LDL level to fall in range before considering increasing
phone time
sorry, can you repeat that? I'm sorry. There's okay. How long should we? I'm reading it out. How long should we for LDL to fall in the range before? Yeah. So there's good data for this also. You need to look at least for 6 weeks. You wait 4 to 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, check the LDL levels again. If your LDL levels are not at the target levels, you need to step up your statin dose or add ezetimibe. Great question.
I think with that, we'll go to shift the gate to the next. Ravi?
Yeah, sure, sir. Maybe if you can mute, somebody is talking.
I know. I've been telling this fellow to mute.
Crosstalk, we can, I think, mute them. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be good.
Can you mute everybody, please? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for those. But I would like to discuss our rivaroxaban later on if we have, because that's something coming up quite strongly from the pharma guys, but I couldn't find really good evidence. Okay, thank you. So we'll.
Yeah, we can move on.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my screen seems. Okay, yeah. So now we'll go to revascularization and we'll look at this into these 3 headings: CABG versus medical therapy. So data for the CABG came through this seminal meta-analysis, this classic paper by our very own Professor Salim Yusuf from Bangalore in 1994, where he analyzed 7 CABG trials, enrolling almost 2,600 patients. And this study was the one that showed that CABG has a mortality benefit. At 5 years, there was a 39% reduction in mortality, which persisted even up to 10 years. But although the mortality improvement reduced to around 17%, but it persisted till even 17 years. The 30-day mortality in that era, remember these trials were done in the 1970s and the 1980s, was around 3%. And only 20% of these trials had an LV ejection fraction of 50%. So most of these patients had a good EF. But still, this is the meta-analysis that all of us need to go through at least once in our lives to understand how revascularization came about. Okay, this is one of the most important papers. I think everybody needs to read this. When they analyzed the subgroups, they found that the mortality benefit was the greatest in patients with left main, patients with triple vessel disease, whether they had with or without proximal LAD involvement, patients with double vessel disease with proximal LAD. Benefits were greater in those with an abnormal exercise stress test at baseline. Benefits were similar whether the patient had or did not have LV dysfunction, or whether the patient had or did not have stable angina. That means, if you can see here, 1 minute, let me use my pointer here again. If you can see here at the bottom, whether the patient had angina or not did not determine whether the patient had a mortality benefit. The mortality benefit was similar. And those who had much more severe disease, that is those who had triple vessel or left vein, derived a greater benefit. And this benefit tended to last longer in patients who had more severe disease. Now, the criticism of this meta-analysis has been that the medical therapy in the control arm was very poor at that time. That's true. Only 2/3 were taking a beta blocker, 1/5 were taking an antiplatelet. There was no statin, there was no RAS, there was no ACE inhibitors. But the counter argument to this is that the medical therapy in the CABG arm was even worse, actually. Hardly 1/5 were taking a beta blocker, hardly 1/4 were taking a antiplatelet, or there was no statin. Please remember that 41% patients in the medical arm crossed over to the CABG arm, indicating that this estimate that you have of a mortality benefit is actually an underestimate. Actually, the benefit is much more. And also remember that at that time, in the 1970s and 80s, LEMA was not the standard. Only 10% of the patients in the CABG arm actually received a LEMA. So given the fact that nowadays there is a near universal utilization of LEMA, there are better surgical skills, better myocardial protection techniques, we have better surgical outcomes. And addition of GDMT or guideline directed medical therapy to the best surgical techniques can actually improve the outcomes further. For example, DAPT has been shown, not a great evidence, but there are some studies that show that DAPT improves vein graft patency. Similarly, high dose statins can improve vein graft patency. So CABG, irrespective of whether the patient has or does not have angina, in the given subgroup of patients, left main, triple vessel, and possibly and double vessel disease with a proximal LAD involvement, has a mortality benefit. If you look at contemporary studies that came out after 1999, still CABG had a mortality benefit. There was an improvement, actually a much more better improvement in terms of myocardial infarction in the studies that came after 1999. So CABG has a very good statistically robust survival benefit when as compared to initial medical therapy. This was a meta-analysis in BMJ that looked at a large number of patients of 85,000. It only looked at randomized trials, no other, it didn't look at any observational studies, but came out with this outcomes. Now, as I mentioned to you, the previous studies actually enrolled only patients with a good EF. Patients, traditionally the CABG trials excluded patients with an EF of less than 35%. So do we have data for patients with a EF of less than 35% as far as CABG is concerned? The STITCH trial looked at this question. They randomized 1,000 odd patients to CABG versus OMT with an EF of 35% or less. At a follow-up of 5 years, the initial paper that came out or the initial result that came out did not show a benefit in terms of all-cause mortality. Although it did show an improvement in CV mortality, but the primary endpoint, which was the all-cause mortality, was not different. But the authors, knowing that CABG tends to, the effects of CABG tend to comes much more in the long term, looked at the 10-year data. That's called as the STITCHES trial. And this showed a very good statistically robust reduction in all-cause mortality by 16%. If you look at this table here, everything, all p-values are less than 0.05. There's improvement in death from all cause, death from cardiovascular cause, improvement in hospitalization. And the benefit was much more in those who had triple vessel disease and much more in younger patients. This is obvious because elderly patients tend to have much more comorbidities. So they may tend to, have a mortality not related to CV, cardiac problems, but actually due to their other comorbidities. So now we have data for CABG both in EF of less than 35% and as well as patients with good EF. Now coming to the three main parts, coming to CABG versus PCI. Now what's the data for this? So let's look at the three important target populations. First is patients who have an isolated proximal LAD disease. I've taken this because proximal LAD supplies a large area of myocardium and tends to have a major adverse effect on the survival whenever it tends to get occluded. Second group is triple vessel disease. And third is left main disease, which has become a real conundrum these days. So coming to proximal LAD disease, there was this meta-analysis in American Journal of Cardiology in 2016, which looked at 5,000 odd patients. But this had both observational and randomized trials. So this was not just a randomized comparison. But this study is the only thing that we have in terms of the power. So let's look at what it says. There was no difference in terms of mortality or in terms of myocardial infarction. But TVR, that is target vessel revascularization, increased in the PCI group by almost 2 times. Caveat here is that this study is mainly used first generation DS, which is no longer the standard. So currently the recommendation is that if you have a relatively straightforward anatomy, PCI with a second generation DS is the way to go for a proximal LAD disease. But always consider CABG higher up if you have an osteal LAD lesion or if you have some involvement of the distal LMCA or the osteocecs, or if you're doing a complex bifurcation, LAD intervention, because please remember that for the surgeon, putting in a Lima graft is the same whether there's a bifurcation or not. It doesn't matter for him. The complexity doesn't change for him. For the interventional cardiologist, involvement of a large diagonal or a distal LMC involvement makes the procedure much more difficult. Of late, there's op cap, there's mid cap, so they can do it very easily. Coming to triple vessel disease, here we have 2 studies. One is a Syntex trial that used the Taxus stent and the Freedom trial. Freedom trial was conducted mainly in diabetics. It utilized Cypher or Taxus. Now here there's uniform consensus that CABG scores over PCI hands down. If you look at the data of the Freedom trial, this was, as I said, Freedom trial was conducted in diabetics. There was a huge mortality benefit of almost 6%, 6% absolute reduction in terms of death, 7% absolute reduction in terms of MI. There was no doubt an increase in stroke in the CABG arm, but overall, CABG scored for diabetics with multivessel disease. Interestingly, there was no difference in terms of the syntax score. That is, patients with whether it was a low syntax score or an intermediate syntax score or a high syntax score, all derived benefit from CABG. Similarly, for the syntax trial, this is a syntax trial that looked at triple vessel. I'm talking mainly of the triple vessel group. We also have another group, which is the left main group in this case. MACE, all-cause death, and MI, all statistically significantly improved by CABG. So for CABG, for triple vessel disease, CABG is the standard of care. You may consider CABG in patients with a syntax score of less than 22, because when they analyze the syntax trial in terms of a low syntax score between 23 to 32, or less than 22 or above 33, those with a syntax score of less than 22, you can see here, MACE was similar, death, MI, stroke was similar, death, all-cause death, and MI was similar in the group that had a syntax score of less than 2. But please remember that this is a hypothesis generating. Why do I say it's a hypothesis generating? It's because the syntax trial did not meet its primary endpoint. The primary endpoint of non-inferiority of PCI over CABG was not met. So this is what we call as a hypothesis generating observation, that patients with a syntax score of less than 22 may undergo PCI. So European guidelines of 2019, if you have diabetes, whether it's a low syntax score or a high syntax score, CLBG is a treatment of choice. Sorry, this is without diabetes, I'm sorry. You may use PCI if you have a score of less than 22. Whereas for syntax score for diabetics, whether you have a low syntax score or a high syntax score, CABG is the modality of choice. Now moving on to left main disease, here we have 3 trials, the syntax left main subgroup, the Noble trial. Please remember, Noble trial used the biometrics as a stent, and an Excel trial, which uses IS as a stent. So this is what generated a lot of discussion then, because the syntax left main 5-year results showed that there was no difference between CABG or PCI. In fact, PCI group had lower stroke. Of course, revascularization was much more in PCI. When you look at the subgroups of a syntax score of less than 32 and more than 33, those with a score of more than 33 actually tended to do better with CABG. But overall, for a left main disease, PCI and CABG appeared to be good outcomes or valid outcomes on the basis of the syntax 5-year results for the left main subgroup. As a result, 2 more studies were designed, namely the Noble trial and the Excel trial. First, I'll deal with the Noble trial because there things are much more simpler. Now, unlike the syntax trial results, the Noble trial, which enrolled 1,200 patients of left main disease, CABG came out to be superior to PCI. Wide difference in the curves. Mortality, no doubt, was similar, but MI rates were 3 times higher in the PCI arm, and so was revascularization. And this study concluded that CABG is superior to PCI irrespective of the syntax score. Now, coming to the left-hand side, which is the Excel trial, and that's the place where there's been a lot of debate, a lot of discussions. I'm sure everybody can put in. The 5-year results of the Excel trial, this was a trial that enrolled LMCA patients with a syntax score of less than 33. The 5-year results came out saying that PCI was non-inferior to CABG as regards to the primary endpoint of death, MI, and stroke. This is what the paper said, or this is what the Excel trial authors said. But one very prominent author, David Tegart, who was one of the PIs and also the chair of the surgical group, he withdrew his name from this 5-year results because the death rate or the all-cause death rate was increased in the PCI arm. And so were the non-procedural MI rates. Almost, if you see here, MI rates were almost 2 times. Mortality was almost 40% increased. He claimed also that the periprocedural MI, the definition of periprocedural MI was biased towards the PCI arm, and that this definition was changed during the course of the study the study used the SKY definition, which favors PCI rather than the universal definition. And in December 2019, the European Association of Cardiothoracic Surgeons withdrew their support to these guidelines. And BBC also did a major coverage of this controversy because they somehow caught hold of this data and they did their own analysis using their own statistician, and they came out with an entirely different result. That is, they showed that CABG was actually superior to PCI. I'll not go further into details, but so what do we do in practically? I would say that, given that we now have a very good, expertise in terms of doing PCI for left veins, patients with an isolated osteal LAD disease or with a shaft LMCA can still go for PCI. You may consider PCI for LMCA with a single vessel disease, or when there's an emergency, like someone comes in with an ACS and you have an osteal LMCA, and of course those who are at high surgical risk. But CABG should be preferred whenever you have an associated triple vessel, whenever you have a complex anatomy, that is, you're doing a bifurcation, distal LMCA bifurcation with a lot of calcification, or if there's a CTO of one of the vessels, prefer CABG. Or if a patient is a diabetic or cannot comply with DAPT, CABG is the way to go. This is the guidelines from the European guidelines of 2019. But as I said, the EACTS have withdrawn support for these guidelines, so these are no longer valid. So now we come to the last part of my talk, which is what about PCI versus OMT? Rather, this should actually be said as what about an initial invasive therapy versus an OMT? We have two trials in this, the COURAGE trial and the ISCHEMIA trial. Now, just a small background about what this is. So these are known as what are called as strategic trials or strategy trials. So they should not be misinterpreted as trials that are looking at medical therapy versus PCI. That's not the correct way to interpret this trial. Rather, these trials look at whether an initial revascularization therapy is equivalent or superior to a delayed revascularization therapy. Please note that these trials are very difficult to conduct. They have they take long to get completed. Often the target endpoints are not met. There's a lot of crossover because from the OMT, they go over to the revascularization arm, then your intention to treat analysis becomes much more difficult. And often, as it has happened in the past, by the time this trial gets completed, the revascularization modality is no longer the standard of care, as it happened with COURAGE trial where BMS was used, or in the BARI 2D trial where the first generation's DS was used in around 30% patients. So these are the problems with these trials, but they give us very good insights into how OMT works or how much should we rely on OMT. So first, let's start with COURAGE trial. This was done in between 1999 and 2004, and this trial looked at symptomatic patients with stable CAD who had evidence of myocardial ischemia on imaging and significant CAD on coronary angiograms. So all these three were required when they looked at this trial. They enrolled around 2,300 patients. All of them enrolled in USA and Canada with a median follow-up of 4.6 years. This study found no difference in death, MI, or hospitalization for ACS. In terms of relief of angina, there was a good relief in terms of angina at up to 1 and 3 years, but at 5 years, the relief of angina became equivalent, probably because a good number of patients, almost 26% of the patients, crossed over to the PCI arm. So, depending on which side of the belief system you are, this either encouraged us or discouraged us. But what it told us was that PCI is not the only viable or clinically defendable initial strategy for stable CAD. OMT alone may be suitable and appropriate for many patients, and even for physicians too. PCI is a good option for relief of angina, which is not improved by medical therapy. But please note that OMT should not be looked as a suboptimal, non-aggressive, cheap medical therapy. OMT is a highly effective medical strategy. So please put your hearts into OMT. It makes a huge difference. We have had patients for 10 years, 15 years now coming who were told to do some procedure in the past, declined, or we told them not to undergo, and they're still doing fine. So OMT is here to stay. It's good and it makes a difference. But as I said, COURAGE had a number of limitations. The most important was it only used BMS. Hardly 2% of the patients had a cipher in that trial. Most patients had only mild ischemia. 2/3 of the patients had mild ischemia. As I said, 32% crossed over to the OMT arm. The actual planned, the trial was planned for a crossover of only less than 10%. So this was a huge crossover. Pre-randomization invasive CAG was done. So this led to a lot of bias, selection bias, because once you see a lesion, you tend to not enroll these patients for a randomized trial. There was no use of FFR in this trial. And critics or the interventionists say that this trial utilized what is called as an unrealistic OMT. That is OMT that cannot be practically achieved, because this OMT was directed by a specially trained nurse. All the OMT given in this trial was free, and patients did. This OMT was phenomenal in this trial. So the interventionists say that this is really not achievable in the real world, but that's that's not the crux of the matter. So all of this led to the creation of the ischemia trial. Okay, that's the latest trial that was published last year. The ischemia trial enrolled patients with stable CAD. All of them had either a class 1 or 2 angina. They had to have moderate or severe ischemia on SPECT imaging, on CMR, on echo, and later on even on treadmill test. They had to have this. After this, they all underwent a blinded coronary angiogram. So unlike COURAGE, where patients got randomized after an invasive CAG, here patients got randomized after a coronary or after a CT coronary angiogram. CT coronary angiogram may not have been done in those patients with a baseline CKD or if their anatomy was already known. CT angiogram, once it was done, if the patients had left main significant disease, they were excluded. If they had insignificant disease, they were then excluded. Subsequently, they were randomized to an invasive strategy that included catheterization followed by revascularization, and patient could either go to a PCI or they could go to CABG in this case, or they underwent a conservative therapy where only OMT was given and catheterization was reserved for OMT failure. Approximately 5,000 patients were randomized across 37 countries. The endpoint was CV death, MI, unstable angina, heart failure, and associated cardiac arrest. Median follow-up was 3.3 years. FFR here was used to guide PCI in this case. Now, we are proud to say that Jayadeva was a part of this, and Jayadeva was the third highest enrolling site across the world. And under the leadership of Dr. Nagaraj Murthy and Professor C.N. Manjunath, we were the third highest enrolling site across the world. The highest enrolling site also was from India, from Trivandrum. Approximately 80% of the patients in the invasive arm underwent revascularization, of which 74% underwent PCI and 26% underwent CABG. The remaining 20% either did not have significant disease or they had disease which was so diffuse that it could not be revascularized. Among the conservative arm, 23% underwent revascularization. Now, when you look at the primary outcome of death, MI, unstable angina, heart failure, or associated cardiac arrest, there was no difference between the conservative arm and the invasive arm up to a follow-up of 4 years. There was no difference in terms of all-cause death. But surprisingly, there was some increase in non-cardiovascular death in the invasive arm. Why this has happened, we still don't have the data. There is some increase in cancers and infection, but somehow this was statistically significant, an increase in non-cardiovascular deaths. Coming to myocardial infarction, and this is where the story becomes very interesting. If you look at overall, there was no difference. When you look at the p-value of 0.38, there was no difference. But if you look at these curves much more closely, the invasive arm tends to have more events in the first 2 years, and then the curves start crossing over, and then your invasive arm starts becoming better, and the conservative arm starts doing worse. Why did this happen? This happened because the MI included 2 types of MIs, namely procedural MIs and spontaneous MIs. So obviously, procedural MIs were much more in the invasive arm because by definition, that's where the MIs have to take place. But importantly or interestingly, in the invasive arm, spontaneous MI, that is the MI that you see day in and day out, were reduced by a statistically significant 33%. Invasive arm did better. Now, some people said that this may be due to the DAPT therapy that was used in these trials. But please note that the DAPT curves start converging by 18 months, whereas the MI curve start diverging at 2 years. So this explanation that DAPT use improved the outcomes of MI in the invasive arm does not hold good, in my opinion. And importantly, when you look at what did these MI lead to, procedural MIs did not affect the overall death or overall cardiac mortality, but spontaneous MIs, type 1 and type 4B MIs, increased cardiovascular deaths by almost 4 times in the type 4B, but in type 1 it was 2 times, both in terms of all-cause death and CV death. This is an analysis from the ischemia trial. This came out just this year, that this improvement in the spontaneous, the improvement in the spontaneous MI had an outcome effect on the all-cause death as well. As a result, even the combined endpoint of death and MI started, diverging after 2 years in this study. Here, if you look at the 4-year data of death and MI, it starts becoming much more significant. And of course, CV death was no difference. There was an improvement in hospitalization of unstable angina, but no improvement in any of the recurrent cardiac arrest or stroke. Somehow, heart failure did worse off in the invasive arm. This was a little surprising, but we still don't know why this happened, because still too early in the time course. We need much more papers to come out from this thing. As far as improvement of angina, there was a very good improvement in angina, both in the early part, in the middle part, and in the later parts of the trial. Patients who had daily or weekly angina and patients who had monthly angina derived greater benefit, whereas those who had no angina at baseline obviously did not have any benefit in this study. Okay, so the summary of this trial was that overall, an initial invasive strategy as compared to an initial conservative strategy did not demonstrate a reduction in the risk at a median follow-up of 3.3 years. But the curves, tend to cross, and there's an early risk for the invasive arm at up to 6 months, and then subsequently there's a benefit in the invasive arm. Procedural MIs were increased in the invasive strategy, whereas spontaneous MIs were reduced, and there was no mortality benefit. As far as quality of life is concerned, patients with stable, those who have had angina either daily or weekly had a very significant durable improvement in their quality of life and angina control, whereas those who had no symptoms obviously did not have a benefit in terms of PCI. So there are some pros and cons of this ischemia trial. Shall we go to that, sir, or because I'm coming to the end of my talk? If you want, I'll.
I think.
Yeah.
Shall we let him conclude, sir? We'll have some discussion.
Yeah. You can conclude it quickly.
Okay, I'll skip these two slides and go only to the conclusion. So in conclusion, PCI leads to greater relief of angina and improvement in quality of life. It has, as of now, not been shown to improve survival, but given the results of the FAME2 trial, which I've not covered in this, and some sort of a signal from the ischemia trial, second generation DS may, and the term is may here, may improve MACE in the presence of objective ischemia. But in stable CAD patients who have no clear indication for CABG, a strategy of initial medical management without immediate PCI can be safely implemented, with the understanding that 1 out of 3 patients may require revascularization in the long term over the next 2 to 5 years. Thank you for the patient hearing, and we can have a discussion on this. I'll keep this thing in case we want to discuss ischemia, we can discuss about it.
Thank you, Dr. Ravimat. I think you covered extensively. I think it would have taken more than 1 month for us to go through all this data information. The topic is too big.
It's too big. Actually, that's why I took 2 weeks. I requested Inger sir to give it. You
covered most of the important aspects, and you stressed upon patient with chronic stable angina. Still, optimal medical treatment, the way to go, especially risk factors modification. You told not only just multiple risk factors. If you correct, probably that lifestyle is very important. So you have told in BARI 2D and COURAGE trial, the risk factors management. More the risk factors you treat, probably they feel better. There's some steno 2 data we have seen. Not only just reducing the lipids, you have to reduce the blood pressure, lipid management, diabetes management, cessation of smoking have a important impact in the chronic stable patients. That compliance and that should be continued. And revascularization, probably small group of patients in chronic stable angina, especially probably those patients who have a refractory angina despite multiple anti-anginal medications, risk factor modification. Refractory angina is one thing where we need to have probably invasive therapy and probably revascularization. And also this patient who have LMCA disease, definitely there is a mortality benefit. And a patient with two vessel disease, LV dysfunction, there is no doubt there is a revascularization is indicated, especially high syntax score more than 32 and a diabetic patients will definitely benefited by CABG. PCI, probably those with the low score or less than 22, your syntax score, or probably intermediate score, you have to individualize the patients. So I think the advantage of revascularization on the top of OMT, always revascularization, we mean OMT plus revascularization. Definitely in some subsets which we described, so it will give better relief of quality of angina and quality of life, and probably spontaneous MI can be reduced. There is no reduction in the hard endpoints which you stress, except probably a patient with LMCA and triple vessel disease with LV dysfunction. I think with this, we'll open for any other questions and comments. Anything in the chat box, sir?
Yeah, there is one from Dr. Priyanka Singh. Even after ischemia trial, ultimate 4-year outcome is favoring invasive strategy, then why it is being seen as a trial which is favoring OMT in CCS patients?
No, so I think that's probably if I have miscommunicated, I would like to say that the primary endpoint of ischemia was not in favor of PCI. It was in favor of invasive strategy. The overall all-cause mortality, cardiovascular death was all in favor of medical therapy. The only difference came in MIs, and unfortunately that overall difference is not there. It's only that the curves start diverging, and that's where the problem came, and that's where the debate and discussion is there. But if you look at the trial in toto, no, it is always the message of the trial is that medical therapy as an initial strategy is good, is a good option. So there's no way that you should think that ischemia trial, the invasive arm has done better. There are limitations of this trial, and I'll quickly go through that. And may I go do that, sir?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
So these are of course the plus points of this trial. That is, it had a very rigorous design. It was not industry sponsored. It avoided the bias that we had earlier. Used all contemporary strategies, but there were limitations of this trial, and I think we need to remember that part. And most important was slow enrollment. Actually, the original target of this trial was 8,000 patients, but finally it enrolled only 5,000 patients. And the USA that spent 100 million on this could enroll only 853 patients out of 100 sites there. We in India enrolled 941, much more than them with only 20 sites. So this indicates to you how many patients they actually enrolled. Why did they not enroll these patients? That means generalizability of this trial may or may not be there. The original outcome, which was actually a death and MI. These are, as I mentioned to you, always remember, death and MI are hard endpoints. This was changed towards the end of the trial to soft endpoints. There was low event rate. In fact, the event rate in this trial was even lower than the COURAGE trial, despite the fact that patients in the ischemia trial had much more severe ischemia. It was 14% here, whereas it was 18% in the COURAGE trial. Patients tended to be much more less symptomatic here. And CABG was underutilized here. Only 26% underwent CABG, despite the fact that 39% had multivessel CAD and 36% had proximal LAD. We don't know why why CABG was underutilized, because we don't know yet the data. The follow-up was limited. Always remember that if you look at CABG, the benefits tend to occur much more later in the trial. And the most important statistical problem here was that the underlying proportional hazard assumption was violated because the curves crossed over at 2 years. So then we really don't know what to believe. But most important are these first two points, which is slow enrollment and a change in the endpoints.
Add- Yeah.
Yeah.
Add to the plus point, one is, there's a 99%, more than 99% follow.
Yes, I mentioned this in the previous, I think, some of this.
One.
Sorry.
And the other
my
is,
slides
of
are not-
course, there is some bias, there's a negative bias. Nobody would like to randomize a patient who has angina and more than 50% disease in the coronary arteries. So there's a slow study because of that. And only 23% were women. So
Yes, sir. True. That's again, yeah, that's another thing. That's women who tend to do worse actually. They were not well. Yeah,
and
but
23% crossed over to
the other side. Yes.
Yes.
But that was factored into the trial design in this case. The
Yes.
crossover was factored, whereas in Courage it was not really factored. But importantly was the original target was 8,000 and we only reached 5,000 over 6 years. And that was the biggest fallacy in this trial. And that's why the endpoint, which was a very hard endpoint initially, which was death and MI, got changed subsequently to a softer endpoint. And, that's where, such a fantastic trial became a little, less good, I would say. Not that it's still a fantastic trial.
Still a very clear, focused study.
It's a very good study. It's a very well conducted study. But given this, I think here I mentioned here, very, very few patients were lost here.
Yes.
Yes.
I just want to point out to one. Recently, one meta-analysis has come out where they have looked at ischemia trial plus FAME trial. And they have come out with the results that there is significant improvement, death and MI.
Yes, I've seen that analysis. It's there, but
Of course, not. So
yes. So, yes.
Basically, now I think the way to go is if you have FFR. Actually, if you look at the FAME trial, FAME 2, which showed little, though it is a small trial, short follow-up, unplanned revascularization were actually less those in the PC arm because they used the FFR functional test. So if we have a CT FFR future trial, probably will give little more in the revascularization arm. Probably the event rates and other things may be improved if you choose those patients who have a clinically functionally significant obstruction. That is a one comment. And what you are telling, event rates obviously in the Courage trial were high because at that time, as you told, the statins and other drugs were not in vogue. Actually, our targets or treatment, medical treatment was not that optimal. That's why in the Courage trial it was 18% and in the ischemia was only 12 to 14%. So I think FFR. Another thing is whether another aspects I would like to come. Chronic stable angina will not be complete if you do not comment on the microvascular disease. So microvascular angina, still we do not know what is the optimal management. Would you like to comment on microvascular disease? Because so many times we see normal coronary arteries, patient continues to have angina.
the Minoka group is what it's trying to refer.
Yeah, maybe non-obstructive coronary disease or purely normal coronaries with microvascular disease.
We had a huge topic discussion on this already, actually.
You had that earlier. You had
We
discussed.
finished that.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Any other
Patil
questions?
is there? Patil? Nagaraj Desai?
Thank you. It is a very nice talk. He has dealt extensively, starting from the lifestyle modification and also the drugs which are giving mortality benefit. And he has also covered the interventions arm also. I think it's a very good talk. And even in the ischemia trial, I think they have continued the dual antiplatelets because many postgraduates are there and physicians are there also. So can you explain whether is it necessary? Because the latest trials have shown it's only either the antithrombotics or the single antiplatelet continuation in CCS.
So in CCS, as I showed in the,
Yeah.
yes, sir, I had shown you with that graph. I'm sorry that my slides are not moving. I think I showed that graph, and the DAPTs, the duration was mainly up to 1.5 years. After that, it came down drastically. And currently for CCS, recommendation is only for 6 months.
Yeah.
If you want, if it's only for a high risk anatomy that you can use a long-term DAPT, but not for a routine, PCI. It's not required.
Correct. I think either you can continue only the low dose rivaroxaban, or you can, but in still Americans feel in high risk anatomy, adding one more antiplatelet, which may increase the bleeding risk. I think that is the one concern there, isn't
There
it?
is a concern.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is a concern.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as you said, diabetics, and Ravindranath also has concluded very nicely which patients you have to take for the CABG, and with single vessel disease, and of course CT with added CT-FFR. Probably that is the one which is definitely going to help in deciding the interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think,
Professor
there was a-
Narayan, any comments?
I think the Minoka part, any non-obstructive CAD has to be taken very seriously. And definitely when you find troponin rise is there, even though the artery looks normal, probably imaging has to be done in those cases. And depending on the imaging, you
Yeah,
have to
Minoka.
continue. Yeah.
Minoka, now the thing is, now there was a study which is published, I think I was read in one of the international conference.
Yeah.
Actually, to sort out it is ischemic or non-ischemic. Sometimes there can be a Minoka with non-ischemic etiology. They have done MRI. So
Yes.
some of them could be due to myocarditis or Takotsubo like that. Then if it is
Yeah.
ischemic, probably it will
Yeah.
separate out. If they are ischemic, as Dr. Patil rightly pointed out, the
Yes.
management will be entirely different. We should treat aggressively like coronary artery disease. That's
Yes.
where actually the CT in a chronic stable angina, anyway, Ravi didn't touch upon the CT with respect to investigation, those class 2B. I would think diabetes with multiple risk factors, as we have seen in the Scott Hart study, actually it will give us there is some plague, and probably patient need to be little treated more aggressively with statins, and so that would reduce the various actually long term the reduction in the MI, though there is no mortality benefit, reduction in the MI was significantly less. Those CT detected. So Ravi, what do you think role of CT? Suppose you see in the CT you have a plague. So would you put them on aspirin or statins?
Just a clarification, I didn't touch upon CT, and I think there's a question in the chat box about that same question, as you rightly said, sir, is because it was not a part of this discussion, because here it was management of CAD, so I didn't want to deviate from this, and this itself had so much to discuss. Now, if this is just, now all depends on what is the degree of plaque. First thing, statin, yes, there's no doubt. I think all patients, people with a plaque on CT should go on to statins. I don't think there is two views on that. Question comes is whether to add an aspirin or not. I would say if this is a diabetic and he has a plaque on CT, go for an aspirin. If the CT has a plaque, say 30 to 40%, go for an aspirin. Less than 10, 20%, and otherwise physically fit, no other comorbidities, good family history, still probably no aspirin. But statin, yes, for everybody, I would go. If there's a plaque on CT, everybody should go on a statin.
Regarding the statin, there is no controversy.
I want to go ahead.
Yeah.
ACE inhibitors. ACE inhibitors have to be continued. Yeah. Even atherosclerotic heart disease, cardiovascular disease.
This
ACE
regarding
inhibitors as per the HOPE trial and HOPE 2. Yeah.
If you on imaging, if you see just an plague, as Ravi told, statin is a must. Regarding aspirin, I think there is no much data.
There's no data as of now. No.
Those primary trials which diabetes more than 10 years, they included Ascend, Arrive, all those things. So they're also obviously with that duration they would have had a plague. If the patient has no manifest coronary artery disease without any event, I don't think there is a role. If you extrapolate the data for diabetes with primary prevention, still that is a gap. I don't know, because Dr. Iyengar is more man with platelets expert. I would like to know his comment.
His comments.
I think, as Dr. Ravi said, if you see a plaque, definitely statin, there's no doubt, no denying it. Yes. Discussion on that. But my contention is, if you see a plaque, it means the patient, the subject has atherosclerotic vascular disease.
Yes.
In this case, I think antiplatelet is indicated.
Yes.
No contraindication. You're starting with PPI probably. I think you should give. Because I see a plaque in the carotid artery, I see a plaque in the coronary artery. It doesn't have to be a significant plaque to produce an acute event. My thing is,
think,
be given aspirin
definitely.
unless
Yeah.
there is contact.
Yes.
If there are no bleeding risk, if there definitely
Yes,
there is no
yes.
harm in giving, fine.
Yes, yes, that's
Yeah.
what I feel. Because these are, earlier we used to call it subclinical atherosclerosis, primary prevention, secondary prevention. Once
Yes.
you sort of identify atherosclerosis, you don't know whether it's primary prevention or secondary prevention.
Yes.
So with that, I think CT angio, I think this ischemia has opened up a big field, various imaging studies that have to be done in a given patient of stable.
Yes, sir. Yeah, STM has opened up Pandora's box, I would say,
lot of
because
articles coming.
yes, sir.
Because if you see in this ischemia trial, some patients went 25% underwent nucleus, and other 75% underwent the imaging with nuclear study or imaging about 5% and nuclear study. So it was all different types of tests were done in these patients. CT angio, which should also remain the limitations also. Most of the patients will have tachycardia, very difficult to do the CT angio in these patients. And of course, the renal functions have to be kept in mind.
Absolutely, sir.
You
Yeah.
can conclude, Dr. Ravindranath.
Yeah, already we have discussed. I think it was a very good, fantastic talk. I think it was
Thank you,
for us, it is a very good review.
Yes.
But only thing he told, zero alcohol, that would lead to depression. Depression would,
Oh,
create
we
a
didn't discuss that part.
Anyway, I will discuss with Dr. Iyengar later. Anyway, that is a we have to see. Anyway, very good. Thanks for again inviting Professor Iyengar and Dr. C.B. Patil. So I think we'll
Thank you,
conclude.
sir.
Yeah,
You deserve it. We
Thank
wanted
you very
your
much.
comments.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi, Professor Ravindranath, Professor Ravi. Thank you very much. And then
Thank you, sir.
Students
sir.
who logged in, and thanks for the questions. Thank you. And
Yeah.
Have a
Thank
great
you,
day,
sir.
sir.
Good
Thank you,
night
sir.
to all.
Good night to all.
thanks to our Manipal team. Thank you.
Thank you.